All right, well, let's get this started. I like to start on time. I don't want to waste your time, and we got a lot to cover. I'm a little concerned that I have too much to cover. I've got a few backup slides in case I go fast, but I might not even get through all the stuff I have, but I'll do my best, and I will make sure to save some time at the end for questions. So if you have questions, please ask them in the chat box down below. I will cover them at the end so that I can just get them collected and organized, but I'll do my best to get to everybody's questions. All right, so I'm gonna put this slide up here. Just can you hear me now? Because if you can't hear me now, you're not going to hear me at all during the talk. So if you can't, please let me know in the chat box down below. Make sure your speaker is on and not muted, and do your best to try to fix things on your end. I'm probably not going to be able to do a great job of helping you out there. If you do end up having problems, if you're there on chat but you don't get the video working, please just reply to one of my emails to you, and I'll make sure you get a link to the replay of this. I'll make sure I get it to you. All right, so let's see if you're in the right place. This clinic is for you if you're coaching the wing T primarily in youth football, or maybe you want to run the wing T. Maybe you're thinking about incorporating some wing T concepts into your offense. You might be running a hybrid. Maybe you're a single wing or a double wing coach, and you use some similar blocking schemes. Pretty much everything I talk about here is going to be relevant to you as well. And hopefully you want to learn or refine how to coach the offensive line with the wing T. And ideally you want to get better. I think I've gone through phases of my coaching where I feel like I've got it all figured out, and then you find somebody that knows a little more, and you feel like maybe you don't know anything. And I think in general that's a great attitude to approach any kind of activity or profession with. Is just be humble and always be on the lookout for new ideas and ways to learn. All right, so again, as you have questions, go ahead and refer to the chat window below, and I'll make sure I get to them. I do have one favor. Try to keep side discussions out of that. It'll distract the other people and potentially keep us away from finding the questions that people are asking. But please do not hesitate to ask questions as they come up. So I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that coaching the wing T offensive line is hard. I think being an offensive line coach is pretty hard, but I think the wing T is pretty special. And the reason I think it's hard is that the steps and the timing and the mesh require a lot of reps and high precision. I know when I started coaching the offensive line about nine or 10 years ago, I had a fairly immature view of what it would be like coaching offensive line. I only played in the backfield growing up and thought it was mostly about pushing sleds and people around and vertical blocking, and you just got to get the guy off the line. And I know I was surprised with the complexity, and at times you'll feel like a dance instructor when you look at the orchestration of player movement and steps in the backfield. It's like you're being a choreographer and making sure that people don't trip over each other, and making sure your guards can clear the tackle when they're pulling for the kick out, and running that trap can be tough. And if you've coached the wing TO line before, you've probably been in a position where the backs coach and likely the offensive coordinator can get frustrated because he's already got 10 plays installed and thinks the backfield's doing it all perfectly, and you're still trying to get the individual blocks working right and haven't even put in your first play. But all that is what I think makes it fun. It's you can treat the O-line like they are the skill players that they need to be. You can hold them in high regard and help them hold their heads high, that they're a big part of the success for the team. And all of that complexity that we talked about can help keep the kids engaged throughout the season, because there's always more you could be bringing on, and it's not just an exercise of pushing guys around. There's a lot of, I wouldn't call it finesse, but there is definitely a lot of nuance and timing that's a big part of all this. So let's dive right in. Let's talk about stance. And I'll give you my basics that I work with the kids on. This is, the younger the kids are, the harder this is going to be to get really well, especially when you think about, an 8 or a 9-year-old that might be a kid you're going to put on the line. And I coach, we have little kids, we have big kids on the line, but the bigger kids and sometimes some of the overweight kids that are younger are going to have a hard time doing some of these things. So just expect that it's going to be a challenge. The last 5 years I've coached 8th graders, and it can be tough with them to get consistent. The athletic kids I have don't have a lot of problem with it, but there's always a few that, they could stand to do some more squats and get those legs in shape so that they could hold their stance, but you just kind of do the best you can. So we start with the feet shoulder width apart. We strive for a flat back. One tip I like to give is grabbing the grass with your toes. And what that does is it just gets those heels just off the grass. We don't want flat heels. We don't want the heels coming way off the grass. But we want a little bit of separation there. That's a good sign that the player is going to be balanced. He's not going to fall forward or backwards. He's ready to do a flat step or a bucket step or go straight on with the fire. And then we want those eyes far enough up so that he can scan the defense. And we want to get the players in the habit of looking left and right and seeing what's in front of them. And obviously not just staring straight ahead at the player that they have in front of them, and ideally just not staring at the player that they're going to block. So this is something you're going to install, you're going to check, and the younger the kids are, you're going to spend those first couple weeks just getting those kids into a stance as you start some of these other drills, and hopefully you got another coach there helping you out and just checking their stance and encouraging them and kind of working with them on those basics. While we're on stance, let's talk about splits and depth. This isn't so important for the drills we're going to talk about it, but it is something that always gets discussed. And hold on one second, I want to answer this question that just came up. All right. So even for the young kids, I like to start with, we stick to 2-foot splits between the players. And that may seem like you're leaving these huge gaps. 2 feet might be as wide as the stance is from your smaller kids. But trust me, you mess around with this and you're going to have other things that start to break down. And most notably, you're gonna run into issues with mesh in the backfield and getting the right horizontal seams that we look for as we do our mostly our down blocking and our kick out blocking. So we look for 2 feet. If you're coaching the 8-year-olds, you might get away with 18 inches. I would never go narrower than that. Unless you're doing like a goal line, foot to foot type situation. But 2 feet is going to be normal, and we want every player as far off the line as we can get them and still be legal. We want that extra space so that the angles that we're trying to get with the wing tee blocking can present themselves, and that we can move guys downfield. There's something about the community that I'm in. We don't seem to get a lot of these big horse linemen, and so we have small kids more often than not, and we're going to rely on speed and acceleration and just toughness to move these guys, and the more space that we can give them to get to the defender, the better. So we teach our center to reach his arm out as far as he can. We practice that when we're doing snaps with the quarterback. And then we have the guards line up at maximum depth, given that 2-foot split. And the simple rule that we give is we want you to put your hand down on about the heel of the center. And then he just needs to look. If he looks over, he should be looking right at that hip pad of that center, which means that his helmet is right up on the hip, which is legally where he needs to be. If you're doing this right, you'll have the coach on the other sideline jumping up and down, telling you that you're in an illegal formation. Your guys are too far off, because it looks like that. You might even talk to the officials about it and say, hey, this is how we line up. We work hard on being legal, but you want to do it this way for a lot of reasons. All right, so we have a few basic steps, and I'm focusing on the run game in this web clinic. We're not going to get into pass protection, and that's to some extent that's reflection of even the coaching emphasis that I put with my kids. I probably spend about no more than 5 to 10% of my time on protection, and we don't do much that's complex at all. We do very simple protection schemes, and a lot of the protection schemes that we have are off of play action anyway. So they often start looking just like the run play that we're running the play action off anyway. So those 4 steps are power, reach, flat, and bucket, and you can kind of see we use a clock face to help describe the steps that the players can use for that first step. With the power, or sometimes we'll call it a fire step. I'm not even consistent myself, and I tend to call it fire step because the individual block that usually leads to is our fire block, which is the one kind of vertical blocking individual block that we use. So we've got the power and the reach step, the bucket, and the drop, as I said, is really going to be mainly for pass protection. And then these are steps, and it's not completely accurate to even say that the reach step is the step you'll always use for a reach block, because I may be using kind of a reach or even a flat step when I'm down blocking, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But it gives a language for talking to the kids and a consistent way to communicate them. So if you're saying, hey, I need you to step flat to the right, they'll know exactly what you mean. And we'll reinforce these steps in the bird dog routine that we go through, which is we also call that get off, but it's the bird dogs that are going to be critical for getting these individual blocks installed. So let's talk a little bit about the form, fit, and surface. And I thought about even surveying you all that have some experience as wing T coaches, because this is kind of one of those Pepsi or Coke type conversations where, in fact, I had a conversation with a coach over the phone last week that said, "So are you a hands coach or are you a shoulders coach?" And my kind of sleazy answer is that we're both, and what I teach is we always teach finishing with that shoulder and flipper engagement, but we do encourage a pretty aggressive blow with the hands as well coming out of that second step. And the fit and the surface that we try to get to is, if you think about these in steps, on that first step, we're taking a short power step. We're getting those hands back to the hips coming out of our stance. And as we explode out of that on that second step, we're coming through hard with the hands, and then we're sliding our helmet to the direction that it needs to be. And this really assumes that we're blocking somebody that's pretty close to the line of scrimmage, either a linebacker walking up or a blitzing linebacker, or usually a defensive lineman. And we're going to get that helmet to the proper side, and then we're trying to pinch him between ear hole and that chicken wing, that arm, that shoulder. You're not really engaging with the shoulder. It's really more kind of that arm to the pectoral side of that body, and squeezing that in with the ear hole, with that aim point being the near hip of the player. I teach my kids to take that offhand that's away from the arm and that's on the same side that their helmet's on, and get that to the hip or the lower ribs of the defender to try to control the defender as we go through on the block. There's some purists out there that are pretty much strictly shoulders, and I think that's fine. Whatever you do, I think be consistent and drill it and work it hard. I think for some of these younger kids, they have an easier time getting their hands a little more involved, within reason. Obviously, we don't want to teach them to hold, but it helps. All right, well, let's get into the four basic, I call them the indie blocks, or the individual blocks. And this is really what I consider the foundation for a youth wing T team. If you can get these four blocks working with your kids, you've got a pretty extensive playbook to work with. And this is what we drill with all of our offensive linemen, including the tight ends, and as part of our everyday routine. So the first is actually probably the one that we'll use the least, but you need it because you're probably going to run some power type plays, and it's good to have that in your inventory. And that's just the fire block. This is, if you've coached any offense at all, offensive, whether it's a power eye or veer, you're or even just straight zone type running game, you're going to be running this fire block, and it starts with a power step and opposite shoulder, and I'll explain kind of what I mean by that. And I talk opposite and same shoulder to the kids quite a bit, and I'll kind of explain in a second how I cover that. The next is our gap block, and this is an angle block that we use to stop a penetrating linebacker or D-line player. And this is, the thought here is the kid's really he's throwing his helmet in front of the player, and trying to take him straight horizontally down the line. And this is part of the whole the gap and down block scheme that you'll see on many of the wing T plays. Third is the reach block. This is often used on the backside to seal defenders. Often when you have, say, like a play side guard that's pulling or trapping, everybody that's going to be backside of that guard is often going to be using a reach technique to seal behind that pulling guard, and reaching to their lineman, and then potentially to a backer. We will even use reach. We have some sweep plays that we'll use if we're seeing 8 or 9 in the box and they're blitzing both A gaps, and we're going to keep our guards at home. We'll sometimes use the entire line reaching to play side and go with a power sweep. So everybody needs to know this as well. And last we've got the down block, and this is kind of, if there's a classic wing T block, this is it. This is how we move the defender down the line, and this is really the only same shoulder block that we teach in the wing T. And what I mean by that is that if I'm down blocking left, I'm going to be stepping with my left foot first, and I'm going to be engaging with my left shoulder or left chicken wing, or putting my helmet on the right side is another way to think of it. I think of the down block and the gap block as being essentially the same block, and I'll explain in a little bit how I reinforce that. So these first 3 blocks that you see, these are our opposite shoulder blocks. So if I'm stepping right, I'm going to be blocking with my left shoulder. If I'm stepping left, I'm blocking with my right shoulder. The down block is our same shoulder block. If I'm stepping right, I'm engaging with my right. And this is the same. The down block is also your kick out block, that you're going to use on your down play, buck sweep with the play side guard. So that same technique is used in space as well as with those quick hitting down blocks at the line of scrimmage. All right, so I've got a couple, I call them ninja tips, things that may not be obvious, but things that I've learned and maybe I didn't do early on that have helped me the last few seasons. And there's a technique. I didn't invent this. This is, this may or may not be part of your wing tee lingo. It wasn't part of mine early on, but it has been the last few years, and that's the cover block. And the cover block is really just the combination or the hybrid of a down block and a gap block. And you can think of this as the way that you're going to teach one of your linemen, if his rule is to block down left, and you may be using gap on down or God style blocking or gap down backer. I don't care what your terminology is. When you tell a kid that he's going to block down to the left, he needs to be prepared for a few different situations. Unfortunately, the defense doesn't always sit still. They don't always line up like you line up in practice, and they need to be prepared to adjust to a defender. It could be a defender that's slanting. It could be a linebacker that's walking up or blitzing. And if the player is expecting to use a down block, let's say it's your right tackle and he's down blocking left on the down play, and he's expecting to use a down technique on a tackle that's covering the guard, and a linebacker shows up and penetrates. If he tries to down block that linebacker is going to be in the backfield because he has no way to control him, because he's trying to put his helmet downfield, and he's lost all leverage, or he's going to end up chasing him back with his hands. So in that case, he should be using a gap block. Well, how do you teach the player? How do you teach the player to adjust to that? Well, we use the cover technique. And the cover technique, we have the player step towards the aim point being the middle of the jersey, and I just tell them to aim at the V of their jersey, looking straight at them. And we want them to do a down block if they can. So that's the preferred way. And we like the down block, meaning the same shoulder block, because that's going to better control the defender once the running back breaks the line of scrimmage. It's going to make it harder for that defender to scrape back and make a tackle. However, we also don't want him in the backfield. So if he's penetrating hard and the lineman is going straight at that midline on the player, he can then adjust and slide his helmet upfield. So now if he's down blocking left, it's going to be a right shoulder block, and just use the player's momentum to take him straight down the line. We can't, I don't know what your youth league rules are. If you're a high school coach, you're probably just telling me, hey, why don't you just cut the player? Well, we can't cut block in our league. There's no initial contact below the waist by either the offense or the defense, unless you're making a tackle, of course. So we use that cover technique. And once we've taught the players the down and the gap technique, and they're doing that well, we will do some cover block drills that look just like a gap and down block individual block drill, but we'll give hand signals to the defender to either sit back and read and be more stationary, or to penetrate hard and get those players used to adjusting for that. I'll tell you that this one change did more for my tackles and tight ends, because they're the ones that need to execute this the most often. This was a huge benefit. So if you're not doing the cover block drill and teaching that, you want to definitely incorporate that with your down and gap block scheme. So this isn't really a different block, because it ends up being a gap or a down block technique, but it's a way to get them on the fly to know what they need to do. All right, let's get into drills, and this is kind of another ninja tip. I'm big into reps and high pace for my practices, and I hope you are too. If you're organized and you've got the right coaching staff around you, players should always be moving. And I don't know a way to teach the offensive line that doesn't involve a lot of mass teaching and mass repetition, particularly when you're teaching these, the initial steps and the bird dogs, the individual blocks and the combo blocks. You want to be maximizing reps once you've taught the technique and installed it. And I'll show you some diagrams to get into that a little bit more in a second. But a rule of thumb that I would give you is that you take the number of players, divide it by 2 or 3, and that's how many stations you should have running concurrently, and you should set them up so that you can see them all. I don't ever have enough linemen that I need to have some in front of me and behind me so that I can kind of stand in the middle and look both ways. I usually have about 10 linemen, 12 max. So I'm running usually about 4 or 5 stations that I can just keep right in front of me and watch. When you're doing combos, so you've got 2 or 3 offensive linemen working against 2 or 3 defenders, you cut that in about half. So you're probably going to have about 2 or 3 stations in that case. So let me show you the drill sequence, and at the end I'll kind of show you what a practice setup looks like kind of early in the season so that you can see that. But everything starts with the bird dogs and the get-offs, and these end up becoming what we call our everyday drills, or EDDs. So the bird dog, and you can bird dog, and you should be bird dogging every position in the wing tee. It's something that your backs coach and your quarterback coach and even your receivers coach should all be doing this. And if you're organized, you might all do it at the same time. And bird dog is really just when you're walking through steps and having players freeze and working through the whole progression through a particular block. So as we do our bird dogs, we set up 4 bags if we're doing 4 stations. I like the flat bags for this, laying straight on the ground, but you can use anything that looks like this, including you could even use cones. And we focus on initially that, especially with the younger kids, the first day or two, you might not even be teaching any blocks. You might just be looking at, are they getting in a stance? Are they falling over? They're probably crying because their helmet hurts, their head, and just getting them to stay in a stance for a few minutes might be a big achievement. But we start with that short 6-inch step. And I noticed the comment on the chat, is 6-inch good for the young kids? Well, I think 6 inches is good for the young kids, and I think it's good for the high school players too. We teach the same thing all the way up through, and that first step is really a heel to toe. So you're basically replacing your toe position with your heel. So it's a very short step. And I got to watch this all season. My players tend to, they want to step, 1.5 to 2 feet. And it puts them in a very unstable position coming out into the block. And we want a short power step. Those hands back to their holsters, back to their hips, that flat back, eyes forward. And the commands, I'm very consistent with the commands that I use. Because I want quick reps, we kind of come up with a common lingo for this. And I'll say fire right on sound. And I might say fire right on sound, bird dog, set. And then on set, they take that first step and they hold it. And that might be all we're doing right there. But if they know that we're going through a progression, if I say bird dog, that they're going to hold it. And then I'll go set, and then they'll go through the progressive steps. So we use this approach for all those 4 basic indie blocks, as you can see, and we just vary the approach based on the block, and the kids learn to get themselves positioned with those bags based on the block that they're going to work on. And they're not going to a dummy, they're not going to a player, but if they're going to do power, they're going to be just barely shaded off that bag, and before they step right on right power. If it's right reach, we're going to get them pretty offset so they get used to stepping at that 45-degree angle and getting their body around. And then with bucket, we'd get them to turn almost at an angle with the bag to their back. And then the photo that you see here is an example of doing that flat step. And so they're lined up with that bag straight going out to their left or their right, depending on which way they're going, and they're going to step flat. Now, I will say that for these steps, like for the reach, all this is really doing is getting them moving in the right direction. It's not going to teach them to do a reach block. That comes in a little bit when we do the individual blocks, but this just gets them used to that first step and getting good consistency with that. You know, you look at those three players in that picture, and I see maybe two good stances there. This was very early in the season, and maybe I got that middle player into a better stance by the end. I can't remember, but it's, you know, I think if you're coaching O-line, you're probably struggling with a few of your players for the whole season, getting them into a good stance. So the next drill we would do after that, those bird dogs, is we would get right into strike a blow. And there's a few different ways you can approach this. The video that you're going to see when I give you a link to the kind of the O-line drills and teaching points, you'll see some videos in there where I've got these guys going from either a 4-point or 6-point, and then focusing on delivering a hand blow to the bag. You can also start, you know, with the laces down, kneeling, and then hands on the ground, and then exploding out with hands or into the shoulder, depending on what your technique's going to be. We focus initially on hand explosion, because getting these kids to be, you know, a little more violent is important. You know, it's, you know, football has you know, controlled short bursts of violence, and we want them getting used to delivering that blow and attacking. And so the hands kind of are the start of that, but then we'll also do some explosive strike a blow where they'll finish right with that ear hole shoulder technique as well. All right, so individual blocks. This is where we get into those 4 key blocks that I mentioned, and then with a 5th, which is the backer block, which I'll explain a little bit. These are blocks that you'll want to start player on bags. And so my approach is I pair kids up. So if I've got 10 kids, I'll put 5 on 5 and get kids pretty used to matching up with maybe another position player that's the same position. So I might have a tackle and my 2 tight ends, you know, my 4 guards, because hopefully I've got a backup at each position, and get them kind of used to going there. You're usually going to have a similar size and build. And we work through this progression of fire, reach right, gap right, down right, and everybody's doing it at the same time. This is where it helps a lot to have another coach with you that's able to watch half the line so you can watch the other half. And this is where we're going to get pretty violent and competitive. We're not going to try to run the guy into the ground, but we do expect it. You know, we do say that the blocker wins. That's how we control contact, is that we'll usually give a key. It's like, hey, we want this to be competitive, but we want the blocker to win. And that's telling the defender not to make his best swim move to evade a block that he knows coming, but to put up some fight and put up some resistance. And this can be done either player on player or on bags. I think as you get into the bigger kids, bags are probably a little more important, because if the kids are doing this right, they're going to be laying into the defender, and you do this too far too long, it might end up being a bit taxing on the players. I think with the younger kids that aren't going to get as much speed going, player on player can both simplify things a bit, because you know that the defenders often aren't very good working with the bags, but it also gets the blockers a little more used to engaging with another player and their equipment. But you got to teach the defenders to be good participants in this as well. You know, they need to be in a good breakdown position. We don't get them into a stance, and we get them into kind of a good linebacker breakdown, you know, ready to protect themselves and compete a bit with the blocker. So that what we'll call here is we'll do like a fire right on sound, set, and they go for about 2 or 3 steps. and I'll usually blow a whistle, and the same guys come back and they get ready for the next one, which is usually going to be like a fire left. And so we'll go through fire right, fire left, reach left, gap right, gap left, down right, down left, all the way through. And the defenders know that on the gap block, for example, they're gonna creep right up, get in their face a little bit, and try to penetrate past, so that blocker gets used to learning how to adjust and get that helmet across his body to take him down the line. We also do a backer block technique here. And here we have the defenders just back off about 4 yards from the blocker. And when we call backer right, that means that the defender is going to slide to his left, like he's scraping down the line, mirroring or scraping and closing on a like a buck sweep. And we're going to have the blocker work on blocking him in space. And we just teach this, that it looks just like a reach block in space, or it's a log block, but we work on the same kind of helmet position. So he's stepping right, he's going to try to log that guy, so he's going to engage with that left shoulder and get that helmet around to the right side. I think hands are pretty important here, especially when these linemen are working in space. It's going to be hard to get perfect shoulder technique, so getting those hands out, keeping it legal, but getting those hands out is going to be pretty important. So here you can see how my players would be lined up. This is an example of a reach block, and the defenders in their breakdown position, and the kids just going at it. We keep them spaced about 2 or 3 yards apart going down the line. If you've got a line field to work with, it makes it a lot easier. I'm usually practicing on a muddy, grassy middle school field, so I don't have the luxury of nice lines for all my drills, but I'll try to get them in a place where they can get some consistency with their spacing and all that. All right, I want to take a quick poll here, and this is going to take you to, it's a way for me to really understand kind of who's here. So if you got a sec while you're talking, while you're hearing me talk, if you can click through and go visit this little survey that's there. There's just 2 questions. It'll hardly take you any time. It's just a way for me to understand who's on the other end here. See if any of you are high school coaches, and it helps me understand the audience a little bit. I've also got one question about what else I could be doing to help you out as a coach. So when you get a chance, if you don't want to do it now, that's fine. I'd appreciate it if you give it a click through at the end of the web clinic, so that I can see what you all think. Let's talk about combo blocks. This is where things get a little bit more fun, and I think where you start to see some of the wing T specific techniques come in. And if I teach nothing else on the combo block side in a given season, I'm going to make sure I teach the cross block and the double team. And I will say, just in case you're wondering, I certainly consider the guard kick out block, say on buck sweep, that's definitely a combo block, but we use this cross block technique as a way to reinforce the blocking technique and some of the footwork, and then we'll work from there as we get to some of the, whether it's buck sweep or the counter play, where things get a little more complicated, particularly for the guards, with some of their footwork. And if I have time at the end, I'll show you the sweep drill that I like to run. But if from my experience, if we get the cross block working well, and the guards and tackles and centers and tight ends working that properly, then the other stuff just comes that much easier. And the cross block is really just a 2-on-2 combo block that we work on, and it's critical for that weak side belly cross block or ISO play, trap down, and even though we run it with just 2 adjacent linemen, the concepts extend and look almost pretty much the same if you're trapping over a couple of linemen, like you are on down and the buck trap play. We also work on double team, and I'll show what I've done, but I'm actually thinking about changing that going forward. because I think there's maybe for the youth players, there's some simpler ways to teach the double team, and I think maybe I've been making it a little more complicated than it needs to be, because I honestly don't get great results with what I've taught. This isn't a big part of our game. There's a couple plays that we run that use this. We run an inside blast play that's really just, it's a lot of on blocking and some double teams. And we run, we call it hammer, which looks a lot like our down play, but instead of pulling the guard, we're gonna double team with the tight end and the tackle, and we'll use a jet motion wing back for the kick out instead of a guard. And so we do some of the same kind of double team on blocking with that play as well. So let's start with cross block first. Here we have two blockers. We have our angle blocker and we have our puller or trapper. And the angle blocker is just using a gap or down technique. And this is usually going to be a tackle. It might be a tight end. And sometimes it's like on the trap play, it could even be your center. But he's going to be responsible for blocking down on the the player that's playing in the gap or shading the trapper. And his rule is simple. It's going to be a down left or down right rule. The trapper executes a slight bucket step and gets downhill fast for the kick out. The language we use is that he should scrape paint, stay very tight, and we'll bird dog this to get them used to how tight they can be. The two issues that I often see first is the trapper taking a couple steps of depth and maybe confusing this with maybe a buck sweep pull by a guard. And the other is, even if he takes only one step for depth, that he goes too wide and creates an opportunity for that defender that's being trapped to squeeze in and blow up the hole. So the key teaching point here is to stay tight, scrape paint, get that helmet in the hole, and execute that same shoulder kick out block. So if he's trapping right, he's going to step right with that bucket step, and then get downhill and kick out with that same right shoulder. So here's a little diagram kind of showing what you just saw in that photo with the angle blocker blocking down and that puller kicking out and getting that player, getting that helmet on the inside into the hole and kicking him out straight down the line. And we'll use the same kind of terminology. It'll be cross block right on sound, set. And they know that cross block right means that we're trapping to the right, and so the player on the right is going to down left, and then we'll do reps and we'll do a rotation of players. I'll usually let's say I have 10 linemen. I'll be running this. Be running 2 stations at a time with 5 players in each group, and they know that when the puller on the left becomes after he's done, he becomes the angle blocker on the right. Angle blocker becomes the defensive lineman across him. The defensive lineman across goes to the other D lineman, and the other D lineman comes out and sits out for 1 rep. So kids are getting 4 out of 5 reps every time, and they're getting lots of repetition. They're getting to work on some of their D-line technique also, and we do this with everybody. We have our every offensive lineman is going to work on every position of this, because as we get deeper in the season, we will run plays like the tackle trap, where we'll expect our tackles to be able to execute a good trap block as well. Double team. I've taught the lead post inside out technique for the past 4 years, and there's a little bit of complication for this. There's some different scenarios that we work through because we're often trying to release that one of the 2 players, depending on how the defensive lineman reacts. We're trying to release the other to the linebacker, and it's frankly it's hard to get enough time to do this properly with our kids. I won't say it's been, a complete failure, because we've had a lot of success running that blast and the hammer play that I mentioned. But it does take some planning and study on your part as a coach to teach this technique. And I'll show you the kind of the technique that we use on the next slide here. So we'll run a 3-on-3 for this, because we're trying to show how we work with a trapper, and that trapper might also, might be a lineman, but as I said on that hammer play, it might be even a wing back coming across on that jet motion and doing the kick out. But we kind of work all that together, and we work with some different scenarios with how the D linemen are moving around. And you'll see some more detail on this in the book that I'll send out to y'all. So I'm not going to cover too much more on this, because we're going to run low on time. And I want to just mention there's another approach, which is called just a deuce block. And I was at the National Wing T Clinic. I don't know if any of you on this were there this year, but Bruce Cobley, who coaches down in Georgia, spent some time talking about just, a ton of concepts. But he talked about his approach to double team, and he's coaching a pretty high level high school team. And he kind of ran into some of the same issues I was having with having enough teaching time to do anything more complicated than what's really a simple kind of vertical double team, where if you kind of think back to the slide before, if I'm working that lineman that's in front of the post in the lead, they're really just going to step in and try to get to about 6 inches in to close that split. Engage with their, the post would be engaging with his right shoulder, and the lead with his left shoulder, and they're just going to work on pushing that defender straight back and not even trying to get any kind of horizontal movement. If they're able to get control from one of the players, like for example, if that D lineman slants in on the inside player and he's able to work him downfield, then sure, that other blocker can then push to the second level. But he found a lot of success just keeping things simple with this, and I don't know, that sounds attractive to me, because we all are limited on time. You're lucky if you get a full hour of just full offense practice each night, because your kids are probably playing both offense and defense, and anything you can do to simplify and maximize those reps, I think, is going to help. So let's get into some practice organization. Even the young kids should be able to run these everyday drills after the first week or two. I try to find, maybe one of my leaders on the O-line, and every once in a while I'll let them call those initial bird dogs, the strike a blow, and the individual blocks, and they enjoy kind of taking that leadership role, and we really push them to take a fast pace. While fast and quick is good, you do need to balance that with your ability to observe. And as you start the season, and especially with the younger kids, or if you're just now first installing the wing tee, you'll want to start a little bit slower. You need to make sure that you're getting good reps and quality reps. But at the same time, if you've got one player that's struggling and the other 9 are working it out, pull that one player aside. Don't chastise him. Think of it as a one-on-one coaching, but have one coach work with them so that you can get faster reps with the others. I don't think it's ever effective to have one coach with one kid holding up the rest of the guys, talking for 2 minutes on one particular issue with the player. You got to keep things moving. And again, it always helps if you have 2 coaches during those combo block sessions in particular. So one other thing, we're always looking for kind of good pregame warm up, and what I do is my routine. I go right in. We don't do the bird dogs during pregame warm up. We go right into those indie blocks and the cross block, and I like that because it's obviously good repetition and reinforcement. It gets them into a little bit of light contact. A little bit of competition, gets them a little rep prepared for hitting in the game. So think about incorporating that into your pregame warm up. So here's an example of how I install these individual components throughout. This is for my 8th graders. So your schedule might look a little bit different, and so you can see I've got a budget in minutes for these different things, and even in week 2, I wasn't getting to combo blocks until the 2nd day of the 2nd week. So I'm really focused on those individual blocks, getting that everyday drill routine down pat for the kids. And I gradually take time away from something like strike a blow and some of the other individual blocks to work in time for the combination blocks. And I'm kind of a nerd this way with planning things out, but in my practices, I'm also keeping the time and the schedule for the whole player, for the whole team. So I want to make sure that if I've got 20 minutes to work on really my individual technique and some of the group technique, I want to make sure I use it effectively. And for me, that means kind of writing things out really well so that I can budget that time and plan through. And you can see below, we gradually get into spending more time on some of the initial plays that we're installing as well. One thing I want to talk a little bit about that I didn't put in a slide, but before I get to some of this extra material is matching players to positions. And there's a few choices you have to make, but I think some consistent guidelines I can give you. One is you're generally going to have your best, most athletic offensive lineman in the guard position. It's not always the case, and some of it's going to be dependent upon the nature and the style of the wing T offense that you're running. But I just can't imagine running the wing T and having your guards be your second or third or fourth best lineman out on the field. It's hard to be successful if your guards just aren't some of your best athletes, and it's not uncommon for us to find out who our second best fullback is and make him a guard. And I'll tell you, 4 years ago, we had to move a kid who was a very gifted running back and quarterback and put him on the line because he was our next available athlete, and we were deep in running backs. And he did it. We needed to explain to him why we were doing it, but the kid never complained, had a great season as an 8th grader, and then proceeded to become a quarterback at the high school, and he's entering his senior year as a second-year starter at quarterback here in Sherwood at Sherwood High School. So you got to make do with what you have with these youth teams, as you got different talent, and even with the 8th graders, it's not uncommon for me to have a 120-pound guard out there. It seems insane that you could do that, but I've had to do it, and you can make it work. Your bigger, slower kids are usually going to be your tackles. Center, you can make do with kind of a second-tier kid there as long as he can deliver a good snap and can get that good first step. If you've got a great center, that opens up some other opportunities. It opens up that blast play. I think trap becomes much more of a viable go-to play for you. But there are times when I haven't had a great center where the down and the weak side ISO play become my bread and butter plays because I can't trust that we're going to be able to control those A gaps well enough. So I'm gonna skip this extra material. And I'm going to flip through it real quick, but this is going to be in the book stuff that you're going to get, and it's nothing too exciting because if you know buck sweep, then you can probably figure out how to run this drill. But I want to make sure that I give you time to get some questions answered, and I'm going to give you a link right now to this free book that I've been mentioning to make sure you can get your hands on that. And if you have any problems getting access to any of this stuff, please just, if you reply to any of those emails you've been getting from me, you'll get a response back, and I'll make sure that you get what you need. And what you're going to see in that book is part of my full book, which is the Wing T for youth football. It's something that I've been working on for a few years. It's kind of the Bible that I use myself and that we've used in our youth program here in Sherwood for quite a while. And it's got all the video for the have an iMac, or I'm sorry, an iPad or a Mac. You can get the iBook form, which has all the videos built into it, so you can take it on the airplane and not be on the internet and view everything. But if you get the PDF, you can also get your hands on all those videos as well. So now I want to give you some time to get some questions asked. So if you have new ones that are coming up, I know we've had a few come up throughout the session, and I'll make sure we get to those. And I'm going to pull that up right now so that I can get to that. All right. So the first question is, does the depth off the line also help for reading stunts? And the answer to that is yes and no. I say no because we tend to not read stunts. But I know what you're really asking. Does it help you react and deal with stunts? And the answer is absolutely yes. The more space that you have to move as an offensive lineman, the better the chances that you're going to be able to get to the right player. So we love the space, and because we got small guys running around, we feel like we can get the advantage of getting a couple steps and getting a better body position on the defender, even if we're going to be outmatched and outsized. So yeah, the depth absolutely helps. For the younger kids, would you agree that the first step is 6-inch? Yeah, I think for the young kids and the old kids, and you got to keep an eye on that. And you got to keep an eye on it the start of the season, but then stay with it, because the kids will drift, just like their stances will get off. The initial footwork will get off as well. So definitely like the 6-inch step, and you want to stick to that. Another question is, what is the footwork on the pull step? First step, second step? So it depends a little bit, and it depends on the play. But let's talk about buck sweep, and I'll just pull that back up here so you can see. On buck sweep, which if you're doing a true pull and kick out play, this is likely to be one of the first ones that you'll run, whether you've got the 8-year-olds or the 13-year-olds doing it. And the steps are different for the two guards. And the book that I sent will kind of go into some detail on this. But the right guard is going to get quite a bit of depth. He's going to step with that bucket step 45 degrees, getting depth. And he's going to take another step right on line on that 45 degrees. And he's taking that second step. He's starting to get that. He's got that head on a pivot, and he's ready to look downfield, and he's going to begin to turn up and then get hard back downfield looking for that kick out. And we use cones and a hose to mark all this, and you drill this, because the guards often want to take a too shallow of a route, and it doesn't get them first. This helps them clear some of the garbage that you'll see play side. If you're tackling tight end, don't get great blocks, or they get pushed back a little bit. He's got room to clear that. But second, he's got to get some depth so that he can get vision to get downfield and get that kick out. That backside guard isn't going to get depth until he's cleared past that fullback. And then he'll get a little depth as he gets past where the play side guard was. And if you think about that same cone there, he's going to get a little bit of depth inside that cone before he turns upfield to be the lead block for that player. The rules are a little bit different for some of the pulling that you see on the quick plays. So down and the weak side belly cross block or ISO, that's really the trap technique that I already showed you, the cross block, where we're not getting depth hardly at all. It's a quick bucket, but then he's scraping and getting downhill very fast. And that's true for trap, for the ISO play, and for the down play. All right, another question. Oh, how do the rules work with a 6-2D? Would you just block on? Well, 6-2s can look a lot different, and I know that I've had another question, and I'm if you stay tuned on my site, I'm going to do a post on just the 6-2. But I think what the question is: do you change the rules or do you change the plays? And I tend to change the plays and not the rules. With the 8th graders, I've got a little more experience and intelligence where I might be able to get them. We do some line calls. We don't do a lot of line calls, but we're doing line calls. They're calling something every play, but it's pretty limited, and we're not going to change rules that much. Typically, the main calls we're going to do, for example, are on that ISO play. We may do an on block scheme, which we call Bob or big on big, or we might do a cross block scheme, which we just call a Sally or a switch block. And we teach them that because that's just critical for that play. If we don't block that guy in B gap on that weak side play effectively, it's just my halfback is not going to be effective against that lineman. So we want to make sure we clear him out. So we do a line call for that. If you're facing a 6-2 and you've got those defensive ends and outside linebackers, if they're squeezing in hard and you've got guys coming through A gap, so you've got 8 guys in the box, I'm probably not going to run trap. I may not even run down against that. You got to find some other ways to attack the flank and make them wrong. And that might mean running that hammer play that I mentioned. It might mean running a power sweep where I'm not going to pull guards and we're just going to have everybody reach to play side and just try to hold their guy just long enough to clear, and we'll lead with that fullback instead of faking the trap. Then you've obviously got jet and rocket sweep, which are other things you can go to. So I'm more about finding complementary plays to attack some of these defenses rather than making the rules more complicated. So we'll see if I'll stay on if we have more questions. I'm here for y'all. So, here we got a good one. I hate these special rules, like everybody's got to run the same defense or you can't blitz or whatever. It's like, come on, let's just play real football. So we had a coach say in their league, 8 to 9-year-olds, D linemen must line head up on O linemen. Would you still down block, pull, and kick out? Yeah, I definitely would. It does mean you've got to you've got to teach that gap technique, because when you're coming down on that next heads up guy, you're probably going to be using that gap technique quite a bit, and getting that depth off the line is going to help you at all. So this is just really a geometry problem, which is how do I get that tackle or tight end, one guy over and executing a good down block. And, I think doing that cover block drill and getting depth off the line. I'd love this as an offensive coordinator, because I have pretty good ideas of what I'm going to see, which is going to help a lot. I don't have to scheme against a lot of gap playing, which can create some of its own complexities. If you've got a stud tackle that's blowing up A gap, that can be pretty tough also. All right, great. Oh, hey, seems like we got a former Sherwood guy here from Fernley, Nevada. I see you there, Ty. Great, glad you made it. Here we go. Yeah, Coach Maddox says, in respect to tackle trap, if you can't pull, the cross block can be used with younger kids. Yep, I agree with that. You got a lot of things that you can do there. Again, keep seeing things, really keep things simple. Start with a core set of 4 to 8 plays. Make those work well, and don't think you need to overcomplicate the schemes. The rules should be simple and consistent. If you use these techniques, you'll find a way to make the defense wrong, but you can put the kids in a good position. Yeah, you'll see the sweep drill slide is in the book that I sent out, the one that you get for free. So you'll have that in your hand, so you'll be able to see that. All right. Well, I'll hold here for a second in case any other questions come across. But we'll call this a wrap. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time. Stay tuned. I'm going to keep running these, and hopefully you're able to answer that survey. I'm gonna post it here again in case you didn't get to it, because I know it kind of went off the screen. But the more I can learn about you all, the more I can prepare and make sure that I'm providing good material for you guys. Yeah, the videos that are and you can test all the videos out, because they're the PDF link that I sent you for the book will have links through. So what they have is there's a link into a YouTube, kind of a hidden YouTube video that you can bookmark. You can share with your other coaches, and so those will work on. They'll work on your PC, your Android phones. They'll work just about anywhere. And if you have problems, obviously just let me know. All right, I'm going to shut down the broadcast. You guys know how to find me on the internet, so hang in there with my site. Stay engaged, and we'll talk to you next time. Take care.